Disclaimer: this essay does not condone or advocate for violence or breaking of any laws. Before saying what this essay is, I'll say what it is not. This is not an attack on the philosophy of antinatalism or effalism. Also, this is not any call to action. This is a critique of the antinatalist movement. Most of the time by the antinatalist movement or the movement, I will have in mind the movement of advocates for antinatalism and effalism. I understand antinatalism as an ethical position that judges procreation as morally wrong. It is easily and often narrowed down to just humans. Effalism is a view that sees a continuation of all forms of sentient life as a negative. I will link some resources that go into more details on these two approaches. The movement itself is simply a set of people who actively engage in promoting the ideology, who want the philosophy to spread widely and be accepted by more and more people. The critique has some limitations. It is based mostly on the analyses of the communities that either speak languages I speak or who at least responded to my inquiries. It is possible that there are some groups who, by their activities, are shielded from the points I am making. The essay may be received in many ways. It may be disregarded, found lacking or unsound or empirically wrong. It may motivate some antinatalists to change their priorities, or it may serve as a wake-up call for the movement. Before looking at the deficiencies of the movement, it's good to ask what a good, solid movement looks like. And the best way to do this is to pick a contemporary movement that has started fairly recently, so it's still relatively small, but already has some good qualities. I will choose the vegan movement. Vegan activism works on many fronts. It is grounded in philosophy, ethics, it has support from relevant sciences, biology and neurology. Activists carry out various events such as rallies, protests, information campaigns. They gather evidence and make movies. They engage in debates and discussions with the public, even on the streets. They push for policy changes. Some provide cookbooks or recipes to make the switch even easier. They have yearly events such as Veganuary. They provide a highly effective 22-day vegan challenge. But they also work with other groups, ecologists, environmentalists, climate activists. When they see an opportunity to join forces, they push for and introduce more vegan food options, for example so-called vegan meats, again to make the switch easier. Having a good example in mind, we can now look at the movement that is focused on the human antinatalism. We can compare the two and see what the movement lacks. Antinatalism lacks ways to make it easier to live a good life without children. Some tips and tricks for daily life, an explanation of how to fill out the emptiness of one's existence or the desire to continue one's legacy. But it also has no answer to some critical aspects that currently there is no good solution for. How to make it possible for people to cope in old age when they don't want to die but aren't in a condition to care for themselves. A lot of people rely on or hope they will rely on their children or the younger generation to care for them when they are old. What the antinatalists could give them instead? The movement has extremely limited political force, the ability to form alliances with other groups that share some of the similar goals. The only related group that does that is Voluntary Human Extinction Movement. VHEMT is not based on the same ethical considerations as antinatalism, so I separate the two. But they have the advantage to work in the current political climate. With degrading environment, species extinction, climate change, they can speak to other groups and work together. Antinatalists haven't even tried to do anything like that. Antinatalist advocacy is very ineffective. It's like going to a war zone and preaching to the soldiers of both sides that killing is bad and you shouldn't do it. What the anti-war movement does instead is they work on the conditions that lead to wars and try to eliminate those conditions, so the wars don't happen. Antinatalists haven't yet realized this simple truth, so they only work on their arguments without trying to change the world that forces people to have many children or that makes it easy to have children at all. There are virtually no rallies, no campaigns, no protests, no real-world activism. Most of the action happens on the internet, but this is not where the children get born. Life takes place in the real world, in the world that is ignored by the movement when it comes to their actions. Effalism is in an even worse place. While in human-focused antinatalism there are some shreds of work and some possibility to form associations with other groups, effalism has not really went beyond being an idea. The philosophy may be airtight, simple to understand, based on biology and fundamentals of ethics. But what next? How to make it real? There is no plan. There is not even a draft of what the plan would look like. Probably the most well-known Luddite is Ted Kaczynski, maybe better known as the Unabomber. During nearly 2 decades, he carried out bombing attacks targeting people involved in the industrial society and development of technology. He didn't stop at publishing his manifesto in the papers. While in prison, he wrote and published another important work, Anti-Tech Revolution, Why and How. In it, he argued why the advanced technological system has to be destroyed if the complex life is to be preserved. What's more, he analyzed past social movements and proposed suggestions for the radical revolutionary movement that could carry out the plan. Kaczynski's goals are in opposition to effalism, but that's not important here. What is important is that he believed he was right and prepared a plan for his movement. Where is anything like that for effalism? Where is anti-life revolution, why and how? It seems that the alternatives are much more advanced. For example, David Pearce's idea of hedonistic imperative, the abolition of suffering of all sentient beings through technology and genetic engineering. We know what it could look like. There are details. Many people are not only interested in science and technology, but actually work in these fields. Genetic engineering is getting more powerful, along with computing power and clever algorithms. It's possible that many of the future technological advancements will bring the abolition of suffering ever so closer. Is there anything like that going on for effalism? Now I'll elaborate on the criticism just mentioned and add some additional points. This section applies both to human antinatalism and wildlife antinatalism or effalism, so I'll be using the term the movement as an umbrella term. There are many organizations that focus on making the world a better place, or at least less bad. They are organized, they get donations, they make plans, they carry out actions, they do things. And because of that, they are effective, they get results. The movement isn't even organized in this basic way. So how can it be effective? It isn't. There are many causes that are regarded as positive by most, such as ending poverty and starvation, ending wars, doing away with drugs, decreasing crime, working toward clean air and water, and many others. If causes that everyone is in favor of have trouble moving forward, then how antinatalism and effalism can hope to see results without all this support, especially when basically everything is against them. Having good arguments is not simply not enough, it seems to be irrelevant. People working on those other causes do have good arguments and they do have general support, yet they struggle. They are held in high regard. they have much international support, they are warmly received in politics, they get financial aid from small private and corporate donors, yet they struggle. The movement has none of that. The philosophy of antinatalism and atheism may be solid, but today we have people arguing for and against various philosophical positions. Without real-world action, the movement may share the fate of other ethical positions and arguments, endlessly talked about and debated for thousands of years to come. The action I'm constantly referring to is not some global revolution. It's creating local organizations capable of strategizing, planning of events and activities. Such groups could then get financial support to hire workers and get volunteers so they could carry out protests and rallies. These institutions could work on easing the transition into childless life for many people in critical periods of their lives, making political alliances, pushing for policy changes. Another type of action would be setting up think tanks to draw from other fields such as game theory, politics, economics, social sciences, to take the relevant pieces and apply them in practice or propose recommendations. All this is still very abstract. I'll use some concrete examples just to show that some real-world actions are possible. The movement could draft policy changes to reduce or eliminate welfare benefits for parents or other types of financial incentives for procreation. The movement could also lobby for law changes that would instead give benefits to people who don't procreate. They could join with pro-choice groups in various countries to make contraception, family planning, sex education, and abortion more accessible and affordable. They could work on improving care for seniors when they are still moderately active and when they need constant care, so people wouldn't be so afraid of getting old alone without having children. Most of the focus is devoted to countries where a woman has on average 2 or 3 children. This is much less effective than focusing on bringing down the number of children in countries where a woman has 4 to 6 children in her life. The second case is also much more cost-effective. You get more value per dollar or per hour spent on the problem. The current advocacy looks like a simple pastime in comparison. Blog posts, videos, comments, but not much in terms of real action and effective change. It's more of a way to vent the frustration against the cruel world than an honest and serious motivation to do good. It's rather simple not to reproduce, but actually getting hands dirty and doing work, that may be just too much to ask for. Anti-choice groups protest in front of abortion clinics. They attack these places and the medical staff. Clearly, they take it seriously. For them, it's the real deal. It's a matter of life and death. When was the last time you read about a protest in front of a fertility clinic? When was the last time you saw news about an attack on a fertility clinic? Anti-abortion groups, as crazy as they are, take their case seriously. Clearly, for the movement, their cause is not as important. Some antinatalist groups, Indian, Brazilian, Arabic, are quite large, with tens of thousands of members, but they do little more than join online and talk online. They talk mostly in their own echo chambers. Sometimes they engage in sharp exchanges with people who do not share their views. They make silly or abrasive pictures, but in the end they keep it to themselves. The self-righteous drive to change the world doesn't move the vehicle forward. With marginal exceptions, there are no real fighters. And the game of life takes place in the real world, not online. I'll try to answer some objections an antinatalist or an atheist can have to the critique. One could say, "We're not ready yet." This short statement expresses a sentiment that the movement should first grow, build the community, work on theory and arguments, convince enough people. Only then they would be in a position where they could set up organizations and do the real-world work. But how will you know when you'll be ready? How many arguments do you need? How many people do you need? And finally, where is the action plan once you have all those resources? There's none of that. Bolsheviks started the revolution only a few decades after the publication of Marx's Das Kapital. Mothers Against Drunk Driving started in 1980. To this day, they have less than 10,000 employees and volunteers. They didn't wait for enough people or better arguments. They believed that their cause is right and they started doing the work. In the current era of instantaneous access to information and immediate communication, the movement should already be ready. One could point out that the means of achieving victory are disproportionately weaker than the weapons of the enemy. But which organization had an advantage over their opposition when they were starting? None of them. Climate activists aren't nearly as powerful as the corporations and industries that worsen climate the most. Vegan activists don't have super weapons against the animal agriculture, traditions, apathy, ignorance. Groups that treat children infested with parasites in Africa don't have a magic pill. Each and every single one of them is a David going against their Goliath. They're the underdogs, they know it, but they don't use it as an excuse to do nothing. Some of the most successful social movements of the past, first wave feminism, abolition of slavery, ending of racial segregation in USA, the French Revolution, Bolshevik Revolution, had strong ideas and arguments. They were able to mobilize people to their cause, not just to agree with them. They organized themselves into groups that carried out actions, whatever was necessary. Similarly, current social movements, veganism, climate strikers, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and others do the same. They form organizations to plan and coordinate their activities. The antinatalists and ethelists don't fit this pattern. It's unlikely they will leave a footprint in history. All of this paints a very gloomy picture for the movement. Remember the escape hatch I mentioned at the very beginning? Here it is. Antinatalists and ethelists are motivated by reduction of suffering or prevention of suffering from happening in the first place. Well, given the fact that the movement is impotent, there isn't really much they can do within this movement, but there are some good ways of reducing suffering. There are people who work on making the world a better place. The people who do the actual work to reduce suffering in the real world don't seem to need the antinatalist community. Heck, most of them probably haven't even heard of it. They seem to do just fine in terms of organization and mobilizing volunteers. Antinatalists and ethelists can join these groups and do the work that actually gives positive results. Some organizations provide education and health services in poor countries. Some groups focus on access to contraception and sex education. Some NGOs take on general women's rights. Some others try to build work opportunities and improve economy in local communities. There are lots of them. Human-focused antinatalists could do a lot of good by donating to these charities or doing direct work for them. Ethelists who are focused on the entire animal kingdom could switch to vegan advocacy, donating to organizations that work toward animal liberation, or engage in wild animal research and promoting concern from wild animal welfare. In closing, I'll say that the general antinatalist movement is stuck. Those who would like to see support for their ideology grow don't do the most effective things. They are mostly online, with their actions not visible on the outside. Effective movements organize themselves and coordinate real-world actions. Antinatalists don't follow in the footsteps of those other movements. Most likely, they won't make any noticeable change, but there is something they can do instead. They can join existing groups that do things to make the world a less bad place. Things that work.